Stephanie, thank you very, very much. It's really a pleasure to be here, and to see this technology is fascinating. So I think about what we're doing now, this hybrid event online with a small in-person audience. And I think about the petroglyphs on Paint Rock down across from Hot Springs, painted by the archaic people 5,000 years ago to communicate with other people who came by and let them know that there were hot springs across the river. My, how time flies. So thank you all very much for being here. I really appreciate Stephanie and Katie and Patricia, the whole staff at Malaprop for making this possible, because independent bookstores are so vitally important to America. They really are, along with the library up the street, the intellectual center of our community. And without that vitality, facts would be even further endangered. So enough of the comment. Moving on to the book. Why write a book on the French Broad River? Well, I didn't intend to. My intention was to write a book. I grew up in Knoxville. I had a high school chum whose dad was president of the Tennessee Archaeology Society. So on Saturdays, we went over and walked the river, collecting arrowheads, eventually participated in documenting prehistoric habitation. Great river. It was also a phenomenal trout fishing river. In the bad old days, I worked for TVA and I did a little work on Calico Dam, and I hope you forgive me for that, because it was a wonderful river and it is no more. But not really. I got to know the river really well. I thought, no, a book on the Old Tennessee is going to be cool. So I moved to Asheville, and I thought, the market for a book on the French Broad and the market for a book on the Old Tennessee River are very different. We've got about 15 million visitors, residents every year here. Maybe 10,000 people wander along the Little Tennessee River. So hence the French Broad book. I knew about Wilma Dykeman from work I did in Tennessee. She was a Tennessee State historian. Her book, The French Broad, was really an environmental icon. And what that book did was establish the conservation community that over the past 50 years has been essential in preserving the watershed, and we'll get to that later on. But so let's begin and talk a little bit about the French Broad watershed. Next slide, please. The French Broad watershed rises near Rosamond. It includes the Upper French Broad. There are 4 forks there. It also includes the Noachucky, which comes out of Spruce Pine, Grandfather Mountain, the Pigeon River, which we've heard a lot about in the news lately because of the Caruso rainstorm. The Little Pigeon River. The Little Pigeon River drains Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge and Sevierville, and we're going to compare the economic development of those 2 regions, and again the role of citizens in that. Don't forget the Swananoa. Then principal cities: Asheville, Newport, Gatlinburg, Sevierville, Knoxville. The population is 1.25 million, and then about 15 million visitors a year. So Asheville is at the top of everybody's best list. Next slide, please. So the Great Smokies. My family moved from Cincinnati, Ohio to Knoxville, Tennessee in the mid-50s, and I thought that I'd been cast into purgatory. Everybody spoke a different language. They ate different foods, were cooked to death. They listened to twangy music. But the Great Smokies became my backyard. Boy Scouts, hiking and camping. I got to know them well. And I just learned in this book, next slide, that the Great Smokies are not the oldest mountains in the world. Terribly sorry to disappoint. But there have been several iterations of mountains on this part of the continental plate. The first mountains were pushed up by the collision of North America and North Africa. But then there were subsequent periods of erosion and upthrust, and erosion and upthrust, erosion and upthrust. And all you have to understand that, just look at the depth of cobbles and in beautiful valleys like Balsam. It's just a lovely valley. The current mountains are somewhere between 5 and 10 million years old. Now, what does that mean in terms of the age of the river? Everybody says this is one of the oldest rivers in the world. Really hard to document because the only way to really determine the age of a river is to determine the age of the mountains that it cuts across. So the river is always downcutting as the mountains are rising up. And so in each iteration of the mountain, the rivers have cut down. Next slide. So why does the river flow where it does? You see these hashed lines at the bottom of the slide? That's the Brevard Fault Zone, and that's an area of deeply broken rock. So the French Broad rises and flows down that valley. And when you look at that valley, you all have driven from Roslyn to Asheville, and the beautiful valley around Brevard, long, narrow, long, wide, gentle, that follows the fault zone. But when you get to Asheville, the river, and there's another zone of broken rock, not as clearly defined, and it follows that through Hot Springs. In Hot Springs, another fault zone, and a place where in 2005, there was a pretty serious earthquake. Next slide. So the first people. The first people were the Paleo people, and they've been in this area for 14,000 years. And so how did they get here? Well, the closest site where there is indisputable evidence of the Paleo people is in Saltville, Virginia, which is just north of the Virginia Tennessee line and the Holston watershed. And they found arrowheads in association with mastodon and mammoth bones. And so the people were there then. Well, these are highly mobile people. They're nomadic. They're following these megafaunas. And so more than likely, they came down the Holston River or came up the Holston River. They also filled it up the French Broad, filled it up the Pigeon. And there have been paleo points found in Brevard. So we know they were here, but they never were in cities. Next slide. The archaic people are a really interesting story. I mentioned the petroglyphs of St. Rock, and there's the North Carolina Rock Art Project that documented the St. Rock petroglyphs, as well as Judaculla Rock, which is over near Tulare. There are also some other petroglyphs in Ponce State Forest. When they were done, nobody's quite sure, but most feel that they were from this archaic age. The archaic age marked a fascinating transition of the nomadic population to a village population. What happened is this: the climate was warming after the ice age. And so as the climate warmed, Native people learned they could grow their own food. And so being able to grow their own food, they began to settle in places where there was water and where there was also stone to make arrowheads, clay for pottery. Something just happened with us. I hope it. Thank you very much. Anyway, so climate change, the global warming, transitioned these nomadic people into villages. Next slide. The Woodland era is the era that immediately preceded the Cherokee people. And it's an era that's known for its Indian mounds. Now, there is an Indian mound that's right inside the gates of Biltmore. And And these mounds are not the great big temple mounds that, for example, the ones you see in Cartersville, Georgia, or that are 30, 40 feet tall, pyramid shaped. These were very low. But the thing that's fascinating about this mound particularly is there was a post in the center, a couple feet in diameter. And when the sun rose over Mount Mitchell on the summer solstice and shone across that post, it was perfectly aligned with Mount Mitchell. And the summer solstice is a period of celebration, start of the growing season. Found around that mound are spear points that came from a rock only found in Ohio. So how did those get here? They got here because the Hopewell people and the Woodland people were great traders. And so the Hopewell people came to this area. They traded their blades for mica. And so mica from North Carolina is found near the Great Turbot Mound in Chillicothe, Ohio. Also found that mound in Chillicothe is obsidian from Yellowstone. But the thing that is most important and that fascinates me is the alignment of the Biltmore Mound. The alignment of the mounds at Garden Creek are similar to the alignment of Serpent Mound in Ohio. So these people were not only trading material things, they were trading their spirituality, just like we do today when we visit other parts of the country and talk to other people. Next slide. So the Cherokee, we live in close to where the creator placed the first Cherokee couple, Selu and Tenati. So you're familiar with Devil's Courthouse, and so you go to Devil's Courthouse and you climb to the top of Devil's Courthouse. If you look off towards Cold Mountain, you'll see Shining Rock. Shining Rock is where the first Cherokee couple were placed, and they were villagers, and so they lived in, and they were farmers, and they were peaceful, and it was a very sustainable population. If you want to know more about that, get a copy of James Mooney's book on Cherokee myths. It's a wonderful read, and it tells the backstory from the Cherokee perspective. Next slide. And so the Cherokee Nation, we think of it primarily as being Western North Carolina, East Tennessee. The Cherokee shared hunting grounds with the Shawnee, and so the hunting grounds they shared went all the way to Cincinnati, all the way down to Atlanta, all the way over to Paducah, Kentucky, where the Tennessee flows into the Ohio. Those were the Cherokee lands. These different colors, they relate to different treaties that were signed first with the English and then with the Americans, and treaties, of course, that were violated. Next, please. So DeSoto. Now, I've used to live in Northern Virginia, and everywhere you go, these signs that say Washington slept here. Well, that fellow DeSoto, he slept around a lot too. But you can research by David Moore at Warren Wilson College and a colleague have actually plotted his route, and you can follow it by car. So if you go to Morganton, take Route 181 up to Wimble Falls, and then go down to Spruce Pine, and then go through Irwin, Tennessee, and out into the plain of the Noachuk. That's the route that he followed, and he did it in 1540. And when you look at that route, it was May when he did it, but it's not the kind of May that we know. It was bitter cold, and so the streams were rimmed with ice. And if you read some of the memoirs of the conquistadors that accompanied them, they testify to that fact. And so can you imagine walking down the North Toe River past Penland with leather boots that were nothing but glorified moccasins? How cold their feet must have been. Next slide. Trading with the Cherokee. And so I was always curious about why there was such a need for deer skins, why the British needed deer skins so badly. So, the little ice age had arrived, and agriculture in Europe was really depressed. And so there wasn't leather for hide. And the English could get the Cherokee to harvest whitetails, and that's what the British did with their with the hide. Sky Letterer, writing in 1670, recorded the fact that one of the things the English would do was get the Cherokee drunk and talk them out of their hide. And so what happened was that the Cherokee hunters would go back to the village. The villages had become dependent on cloth and grooved axes, steel axes, some cookware. And to get more, the Cherokees had to promise the English traders they'd get more hide. And so that drove the Cherokee people into a condition of economic servitude. Then came the Revolution, and Griffith Rutherford led a team, a band of 2,400 militiamen. And their goal was to drive the Cherokee from western North Carolina. And the reason why was the Cherokee were allied with the British, largely because of their economic indebtedness. And so Rutherford destroyed 36 Indian towns. There's no counting for how many Cherokee were killed, trampled their fields, talk about ethnic cleansing. And so when I think about reparations and telling history like it is, we've torn down the Vance Monument. But if you drive from here down to Clyde and then down towards Waynesville, you'll see highway markers about every 25 miles celebrating what Rutherford did to the Cherokee. And I think we might want to think a little bit about that. Next slide. So much for the political message, no more. So the Buncombe Turnpike, the rivers have always been highways. And so, and the Buncombe Turnpike, 1827, ran from essentially East Tennessee to Charleston, South Carolina. And so settlers followed that, but also farmers, herders drove, can you imagine this, driving a flock of turkeys or ducks from Kingsport, Tennessee to Charleston or to Greenville, South Carolina? Every 10 miles or so, there was a stock stand, and the stock stands became the first inns in the area, and the stock stands were often staffed by enslaved African Americans, and it was the hospitality of those stock stands that began to give this region its reputation for being tourism friendly. Next slide. So you want an Uber in 1820? There it is. Next slide, please. So Robert S. Duncanson, classic view of Asheville in 1850. He was known as the finest landscape painter in the West. The thing that's fascinating about Duncanson is that he's an African American. And so nobody thinks about African Americans being premier painters of the Hudson River School. The other thing that's fascinating about Duncanson is that he was an abolitionist. And he stayed with the patents and did a couple versions of this at their direction. And so he passed for white. The question is Did the Pattons know that he was African American? Next slide. You know, we all know this story about how counties in eastern North Carolina arrested African Americans for the pettiest of crimes, and then leased them to the Western North Carolina Railroad and had them dig the route from Old Fort over the mountain. And so when I look at that, I think about what they had to do that with. They had picks and shovels, they had star drills and sledgehammers, and they had blasting powder. And so after they set off a blast that created gold, they had to shovel it out by hand. I can't imagine the work that they did. Next slide. And so the railroad brought vitality to Asheville. And so if you look at Asheville today, and then you look at Gatlinburg, Gatlinburg is booming, completely different kind of vitality. But in the 1890s, the Battery Park Inn, just over the hill, just up the hill, was a really thriving hotel. Gatlinburg was essentially 3 houses along the street. Next slide. And so Biltmore, always been curious about how did Vanderbilt get here? Why did they come to Asheville? And so we know, that his mother had malaria, and she came to be treated by a doctor, Wesley Battle. But how did they get to know Battle? Well, Battle was one of the early physicians who advocated climate as a cure. But the backstory may be, and there's absolutely no documentation for this, but it seems logical. The Vanderbilts were at the peak of the social pyramid in Manhattan. Battle was an up-and-coming physician training at Bellevue. The Vanderbilt family had eligible daughters. Battle was a good catch. And so more than likely, they got to know him as dances and things like that in New York City. And then when he began practicing medicine in Asheville, they followed him here. And that's more than likely how he became, how Vanderbilt got to Asheville. Next slide. So to think about Vanderbilt's vision, this chateau, French chateau in the forest, it's astounding. And so now the slide changer is answering the door at the moment. So we'll do a little song, dance as a snappy pattern. And so, but legacy of Vanderbilt is the national forest and progressive forestry that really has transformed the eastern United States. And so my minder is back, and so we'll get back on schedule. Thank you. And so logging, and anybody who's hiked the mountains knows these gentle trails that go up through these rock cuts. And so think of those as railroad cuts. I think of those stubborn little steam engines, the offset shaves and the climaxes that are backing loads of logs up and down the mountains and through the switchbacks. Next slide. And think about the logging community. Meredith and I drove up to Lake Logan yesterday to look at flooding. And you look at Lake Logan and it's so tranquil. Imagine a vibrant community of 1,500 to 2,000 people turning out 100,000 board feet of lumber a day. Think about Crestmont over in Big Creek on the other side of Cataloochee Cove. Same thing. You go to Big Creek today, and there's no mention of the vitality that used to be there. Next slide, please. And then there's water for manufacturing. Clean, cold water was essential for the economic development of the region. And so you can see plants there. We've got Champion Paper in Canton, American Enca. Down in Brevard, there's Pesta. And they all required clean, cold water, particularly important for the manufacturing of specialty papers and artificial fibers. Next slide, please. And so here in Asheville, we had Hand Freeze Tannery that was up pretty close to where the railroad yards are at the junction of the Swananoa today. And that tannery was here for two reasons. One, the water, but also there was bark from trees that were harvested in the mountains. And so harvesting bark for the tannery was really kind of a cottage industry, something farm people could do in the off season and deliver it. And so there were these vast vats where the bark was being soaked and the hides were being soaked. And the poor folks that worked there had to unload these boxcars. These weren't refrigerated boxcars. They came from Swift and Company in Chicago. And the hides were stacked one on top of the other and they were salted. Imagine going into a boxcar. It's 100 degrees out. And your job is to pull those hides out and get them in these vats and then swish them around in the vats. Well, interesting thing about the vats, they of course leak. And what do they leak into? They leaked into the French Broad River. Downstream, a mile, maybe 2 miles, was wonderful Riverside Park. And that's where you put your significant other canoeing and for a picnic and for a swim in the pond. Can you imagine what you were really swimming in? Yeah. Next slide. And so the Costa in Brevard, there, the Costa was a big plant that manufactured first cigarette wrapping paper, and then cellophane, and eventually, when it was sold, it did films. It was located here because Harry Frost, the founder, said, we do not want any interference on the part of the state in the disposing of our wastewater. So the Costa is now a brownfield site, and it's under remediation. And eventually, people hope to sell it for a mixed-use development. That will be a while. So the abuse, but that's not the worst case of the abuse of our rivers. Next slide. So again, just for a little time, it's the Roaring 20s. And so the 20s are roaring in Asheville. The Jackson building was built where Thomas Wolfe's father sculpted the angel in Look Forward, Comeward Angel. Beautiful skyscraper. The Mountain View Hotel in the 40s, 50s, and 60s was the icon. It was a big stone hotel, a big lobby, great fireplaces, writing tables along the walls so people could write letters to their friends. In the 1920s, there was Andy Huff's house where they added a few rooms for hikers. And the hikers were the most important part of the story. Next slide. So the Great Depression descends. Most of the mountains have been logged, and the land isn't worth anything. It's called the lands nobody wanted, and so they could be bought inexpensively. Hikers who had gone to Huff's Lodge and hiked a little quadrant around Gatlinburg that had not been logged. The reason why it wasn't logged is you couldn't push a railroad up through the little Pigeon Gorge between Pigeon Forge and Gatlinburg. So without a railroad, there was no way to get the logs out. The forest was pretty well preserved. Hikers enjoyed that, started the movement to create a national park. And in 1934, the Great Smokies National Park was authorized. At the same time, Shenandoah National Park was created on the northern end of the Blue Ridge, about 60 miles from Washington. And so Roosevelt believed that the southeast, the southern mountains, were the most economically disadvantaged part of the country. And so he proposed a road connecting the two parts. And the road would be would produce economic growth in the area. And so the Blue Ridge Parkway. So the Blue Ridge Parkway today is the second most heavily visited national park in the country, and the Great Smokies are the third. Next slide, please. So conservationists really, based on Wilma Dykman's book, have been responsible for saving the watershed. When I was in college, I was studying geology and journalism, and I was at East Tennessee State. At East Tennessee State, geology and journalism began with the same letter. And so I worked for TVA as a student. And I did seismic foundation studies on dam sites in the Upper French Broad and the Upper Pigeon River. Jerry Britton and the group from Haywood County were having none of it. And they forced TVA to abandon their plans to build those dams. And it saved those watersheds. So favorite story, the Asheville Mall gets built on 240. Townspeople downtown, the city council says, oh, what are we going to do? We need a mall downtown. And so their plan was to bulldoze 11 acres downtown and create a big mall. Can you imagine what we have here today? A group of really enlightened people, very smart people, wrapped those 11 acres in bed sheets and showed people what would be lost. And so the bond issue was defeated and the downtown mall never got built. And we have downtown Asheville now. Next slide. And then there's Champion Fiber. Champion Fiber is one of the biggest paper companies in the United States. Part of their processing produced dioxins. We all know about Love Canal in New York and Times Beach in Missouri. Well, we had our own Love Canal, and it was called the Pigeon River. And the little town of Hartford, just across the Tennessee line from North Carolina, was known as Widowville because so many people died from cancer from the dioxins. Again, a group of people, townspeople, got together. They were angry, and they mustered the political capital. They engaged Al Gore, and so were able to force Champion to clean up its act. And in so doing, Hartford was able to recover, and now is something of a whitewater mecca for people who like canoeing, kayaking, and rafting. And the fishing in the river is really good. So again, thanks to community activity saved that town. Next slide. And so here we have from back in Asheville. And Petticoat Junkyard was a place where cars were crushed and all of the fluids in the cars sank into the ground. And it was an eyesore. It was acquired by Riverlink, and using a process called remediation over a number of years, eventually reduced the levels of pollution to mitigate it. It's in the process right now of being transitioned into a nature park named after Karen Faddolan, who started Riverlink. Key to starting Riverlink really was Karen Faddolan's relationship with Wilma Dykman and Wilma Dykman's book, The French Broad. So if you haven't read that book, I encourage you very much to do that. And I'm really indebted to her son, Jim Stokely, for his complete support of this project. And so that's the song and dances. Questions? But
Yeah, so John, one of the things that surprised me in reading your book was your research on the age of the French Broad River and the mountains. It suggested it's nowhere near the 300 to 350 million years old. Coffee there. And I was wondering what in your research, in your writing the book, surprised you the most?
well, that really surprised me the most. And but the second thing that surprised me was really stumbling across Robert Duncanson, and to think about an African American who was the finest landscape painter in the West, and this is the 1850s, the 1840s, the 1860s, and he had that reputation, and he was an African American. So so what that tells me is the African American society was far more stratified than we like to think. So we think about the African Americans as being all enslaved people and all working on plantations, chopping cotton. Far more nuanced than that. If you look at many of the buildings, historic buildings in Western North Carolina, the bricks that they're made of were made by African Americans. The timber was cut by African Americans. The stones were cut by African Americans. They built those buildings. And so I think of a book that was done by James Agee and Walker Evans called Let Us Now Praise Famous Men. It was part of the WPA Writers Project material. I think it's really time that we celebrate the role of African Americans in building Western North Carolina. That was the thing I think probably stood out more in my mind than anything else. Other questions? Yeah.
So what do you see as the biggest threat now to the French Broad?
The last chapter of the book is called The Planner's Paradox. And what the Planner's Paradox does is it looks at 5 vectors of development over 50 years. And so the first one of those vectors is population. Are we going to continue to grow the way we're growing? Are the demographics going to be the same that we're facing? The recent 2020 data shows we're becoming more diverse, but where are those diverse people working? What are they doing? Having spent a little time in Manhattan, I was familiar with Midtown and those great old hotels, where the Algonquin, the Round Table, and where a lot of those hotels on around 34th Street now, the welfare hotels. And the reason why is that downtown area becomes too congested. So are we overbuilding? One of the other questions is, okay, as we become a more congested entity, there are some futurists like Kim Liddell at the University of Tennessee, planner, whose study is beginning to show outmigration of affluent residents from Asheville into surrounding communities. Is that trend going to continue? And if so, what does that mean for Asheville? Major question. Technology, certainly. Transportation. So I blue sky a little bit and suggest that we're going to have highways that will have electric capacity embedded in them, and the cars will drive by in conduction, and you'll have a little card like you have when you go through a toll booth. Well, that's actually happening in Germany. So there are going to be massive changes there. Climate change, obviously. And we're going to see more intense storms. One of the things that fascinated me, everybody says that the 1916 flood was a flood of record, but in fact, there was a flood in 1791 that was 5 feet higher than the flood of 1916. And so the year after that flood, Buncombe County's first county commissioners met in Davidson's barn down on Biltmore Estate to decide where to build downtown Asheville, where to put the courthouse. They didn't put it along the river, like many cities were doing. They put it up on a plateau. Why? Because they lost their mills and their homes and their barns during the flood of 1791. We need to be cognizant about this, and we need to think about it as it goes into the future. Next question. Yes. Sure. Yeah. Riverlink was started by Karen Cagnola. And the reason why I became involved with Riverlink is that its mission of promoting the environmental and economic vitality of the French Broad River is important. So many green groups just focus on the environment and they don't focus on the economic side of the house. And those two together are inseparable and they have to be completed and considered. Riverlink has done wonderful work in creating parks along the river. It's involved in an absolutely phenomenal small project in an African-American community. It's the Central Asheville Watershed Plan. And it's along a creek that's called Nasty Branch. And I understand the community voted to keep it Nasty Branch instead of making it Town Branch, because if it's Nasty Branch, then it's less likely to attract gentrification. Good luck. And if you don't have any questions, well, thank you all very much for coming. This has been a really interesting and enjoyable experience, and I hope you enjoy the book. Now, you have to remember one thing about the difference between writers and doctors, and I apologize to any physicians in the audience. Doctors bury their mistakes. Writers' mistakes live forever in print.